Welcome to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley, along with my co-host,
Michael Zucker.
the author of the Eisenhower Chronicles, and we are welcoming historical fiction author Linda Ulleseit to the show today. Linda, how are you doing today? We're so glad to have you.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, for our listeners who are listening in, let me give you a little brief bio of Linda. She was born and raised in Saratoga, California. She's a retired elementary school teacher with an MFA in writing from Lindenwood University and is a founding member of Paper Lantern Writers. Linda Ulleseit released her first young adult fantasy series set in medieval Wales through NaNoWriMo, complete with flying horses, a love triangle, and treachery by 2014. Also in 2014, Under the Almond Trees was released. It's an adult historical novel set in early 20th century California and is based on 3 of Linda's ancestors. In August of 2020, Linda's novel, The Aloha Spirit, was published by She Writes Press. The story is inspired by her husband's grandmother who grew up in Hawaii. And we're happy to announce that her new release this month on June 27th is The River Remembers, also from She Writes Press, featuring an ancestor of Linda's born at Fort Snelling, Minnesota in 1835. So we're so glad to have you on the show today. And to start off with this interview, we would love for you to tell us more about this book.
Okay, I started, got interested in it because I was working on my genealogy, and I noticed I had an ancestor born at Fort Snelling in 1835, and I thought, well, that's kind of early to have a family at the fort. I'm thinking frontier, I'm thinking Wild West. So I researched it, and I found that at that time, Fort Snelling was quite the pinnacle of Western civilization. The fort was commanded by Zachary Taylor, who, of course, would go on to become president. And one of his officers was Jefferson Davis, who, of course, would go on to lead the Confederacy. And Zachary Davis's daughter was actually a maid of honor at my ancestor's mother's wedding. And that before she eloped with Jefferson Davis. So I'm like, okay, this is a cool story.
Yeah.
Then I found out that Harriet Robinson married Dred Scott at the fort in 1836. I'm like, well, this is a happening place. How did I not know about this, this really interesting place? So as I researched more, I found out more about what was going on during the times about the Native Americans and the clashes with the settlers and all of that was going on also. So I planned this fabulous trip to Minnesota. Actually, my husband and I were going to ride a boat up the river from St. Louis to Fort Snelling, much like my ancestors would have done, and visit the fort and visit Prairie du Chien, which is where my ancestors lived there for, and features in the book also. Fabulous trip. I could hardly wait to go. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So I still haven't done that trip. I still want to do it, make sure I got it all right. But I decided that I was just going to go ahead and research it and try to write it anyway, and then have people tell me if I got it right. And I did have a lot of people who actually live in Minnesota, have actually seen the fort, read it. And luckily, they seem to be fine with it. They didn't say, well, you can't really do that. So, that's not really the way it was. So, yeah. But the book is written from 3 points of view, from my ancestor, Samantha Lockwood, from the point of view of Harriet Robinson, and from the point of view of Day Setz, who was the Dakota chief's daughter. So it was quite, it was hard for me to take that jump into writing the point of views that were not my own. But I researched it thoroughly, and I had people read it to give me feedback on how it sounded, make sure I didn't do anything egregious. And again, it's been receiving a lot of positive.
Yes, it has. And we can definitely say from the Historical Fiction Company that is very, very recommended. We very much recommend it.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your research? I know you said this had a lot to do with your family, but tell about the research and how you went about that.
Well, I had the name Samantha Lockwood. Actually, I had her husband's name, Alex Murray, first. And I was trying to look for who he had married. And I finally found the name Samantha Lockwood. And Lockwood is a big name in Minnesota. He actually, Wisconsin. Her brother was one of the early judges in Wisconsin. And he had Minnesota Territory at the time. And he has written this biography paper for the Minnesota Historical Society, listing out like basically everything he did from the time he got to the territory until the time he became this, wealthy, famous judge in the area. I don't think he was ever actually governor or anything, but he was a very well-known personage. So there's a lot of details, a lot of wonderful details there about his daily life, what the Indians were doing, who was around, that sort of thing. So that was very helpful. But the actual information about her, I had to put together from everything that was going on around her. I found absolutely nothing about her at all. Only in one place did I list her name, and so it was like, yeah, I found it. But all the other stuff I had to put together, I had to make up. So that was a little more creative license, right? It's kind of nice. It's the first time I've written a relative that's that far back.
Yeah.
When you're writing somebody like about your grandmother, you have to be a little more concerned about getting it right.
Yeah.
But this was like, nobody knew her, so I'm okay.
Yeah, that's always good whenever you're writing about the past like that. Michael, do you have anything?
Well, first, I just want to say how much I just love that title, The River Remembers. That's just a very, pretty evocative title. Can I ask, so what, I think I'm getting us into the general topic, but so can we go more specifically in what like sort of the plot is about, sort of whatever the conflict is, anything like that?
Okay. Well, it occurred to me the Mississippi River has been there forever and has seen everything. Everybody, everything that's happened, the river has seen it. So I wrote the prologue and an epilogue from the point of view of the river. And I was a little nervous about that at first, but it kind of ties it together. It kind of like, I don't care who you are or what you're doing or who you're fighting with. It's going to be nothing in the history of the river. The river's going to come and go, and all these people are going to come and go, and it's not going to matter in the long term. So I took a piece out of the river's history, so to speak, and wrote about a time when the Indians, of course, were being squeezed to the west, and the Dakota people were trying initially to get along with the white man. The Ulleseit father was Cloud Man, and he recognized that the white man was not going to go away. So he worked with the Indian agents at Fort Snelling and tried to, he actually created a village where they learned the white man's way of farming, and they, tried to get along with the white man, because the white man's not going to go away. We better figure out how to make this work between us. And it had mixed results because there was a lot of hunger at that time. They were starving, and they weren't able to make enough food to feed themselves and all the other ancillary tribes that were in the region that had some kind of relation. You can't store food for the winter when your relatives are starving. So that became a big problem. Things happened, and the commandant of the fort changed, and the Indians, of course, eventually been pushed into the reservation. And shortly after my book ends, they rounded up a lot of the Native Americans and locked them up at the fort. So it got considerably worse after my story ends. But the point of the story, what I have, ends when they are moved to downriver a bit, not quite to the reservation yet, but they're shoved off their ancestral lands and kind of put into this area that means nothing to them. And Ulleseit realizes that it doesn't matter where we are, we have to preserve as much legacy as we can for our children. Which is the same lesson that Harriet Robinson learns when she and Dred Scott are sold, or actually they're not sold, their owner takes them south to St. Louis. And she says, no, I'm stopping here. I'm not going any further south. She was very pregnant. She wanted her child born in free territory. So her owner said, okay, I'm coming back upriver to pick you up. We're going to go back upriver to Fort Snelling. And so she's just counting the days. I got to be in the north. I got to be up there so the child is born in the free territory. And her child ended up being born in free territory, just right over the line in Iowa. So that was an incredible, powerful moment of legacy for her to leave to her daughter. That one thing, she wanted the girl to be safe, free, at least. That's the least she could give her. And then for Samantha, her husband leaves her, basically abandons her for his Indian family. And she's pregnant with their daughter. And she's like, I can't live here on the good graces of other people. I need to make this right for me. So she takes her daughter and goes downriver to Galena, where she ends up running into the man that started the whole problem for her, the man that her father insisted that she marry back east. And she fled west. She's, I don't want to marry. I want to pick my own man that I want to marry. I don't want to marry who dad picks. And so the man, James Churchman, follows her west. Because he's like, I love you, I want to marry you, it has something to do with your father. But she pushes him off, marries somebody else, picks the wrong guy, and that's how her life ends up, that's how her life unfolds. But then when her husband leaves her and she kind of runs into James, oh, you're still in the West, I didn't even know. And of course, they basically realize they love each other or fall in love or whatever and get married. Now you have the whole story, all the spoilers and everything.
Oh. Well, still everybody needs to read it, even with spoilers.
But the main themes, of course, are the legacy that you leave. How do you take what you've experienced through your history and put it into some kind of form to enhance your descendants' lives?
Right. Well, do you have a favorite line or passage from your book that you'd like to share with us?
I'm going to read it because I pulled it out, and then because you said that, I'm like, and I'm like, I'm not going to find it. I wrote it down. Okay. Here, this is actually from the prologue where we talk about the point of view of the river. And it says, each mother's tear that falls of joy or despair becomes a part of the river's love for her children. The river that flows today contains the last of all mothers' tears and the first of all daughters. So that's basically the theme of the book.
Oh, lovely. That's very lovely. Very lovely. So I have to ask you in that, because I know there has to have been through that whole entire history about the Indians and what they did to them and moved them off the reservations and things. What was like something that was very difficult for you about writing this book?
Well, there's nothing about Day Sets. I basically found her name.
Right.
I didn't know what kind of a person she was. I didn't know if she was like, did everything her father wanted her to do. I didn't know anything about her. So to completely fictionalize somebody from a culture not your own is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So I had to basically find everything I could find about the Dakota at that time and mush her into, make a person out of her. Her two sisters also married white men. The father married one to the Indian agent, one to a trader, and one to the man who was the commandant at the fort at the time, Seth Eastman. So all three of them had white husbands. Of course, they were married. The Indians recognized that as a marriage, but the white people, of course, did not.
Right.
So they almost all of them went back east, married, a white woman, had like a real marriage and had children. They all had daughters by their white husband. So I thought that was kind of interesting that all three girls had these half-breed children. Yeah. And so that I kind of brought that up too and made that part of the story. But actually, I did rely quite a bit. I have a couple of friends who live on reservations and know a little bit more about the Native American experience than I did. So they were able to fill in a lot of the details that would have been more than just daily life, more about how you feel about more of the emotion behind it, which I had no idea. That part you don't know.
Oh yeah, that's very necessary whenever you're a writer, and then to be able to have someone that you could talk to like that even adds to it. So that's wonderful that you had that.
Well, I'm a talker, and so one of the big problems I had with Dayset's character, very first thing I was told by my friend whose husband is actually Native American, they live on the reservation. She says, they don't talk that much. I'm like, well, how do I get the point across if they don't talk? So suddenly had a lot of internal thinking going on. I had to change that all around. She said that was much better the second time around.
Oh, good. Michael, do you have anything?
So as somebody who's, considers himself kind of like a presidential history buff, so I guess this is a two-part question. One is, so does Zachary Taylor show up in the novel? And also, he has kind of an interesting record on slavery, given that he was a slave owner, but is one of those presidents who was okay with the contradiction of both being a slave owner but opposing slavery in a political sense. And just kind of like, what was his record on Native American issues?
Yeah, I don't go into that. He does appear, but he's a secondary character. He does have a slave that is mentioned. And in fact, one of the earlier scenes is when Samantha arrives. She's from a free territory. She's from New York. So when she gets there in Wisconsin, which she believes to be a free territory, and then of course, Minnesota territory, which is where Fort Crawford and Fort Snelling were, both in Minnesota territory. When she gets there's a free territory. So she's really surprised to see slaves. So the slaves came north with Zachary Taylor, and the officers brought their slaves with them, they received a stipend for a servant, but of course they kept the stipend and brought their slaves. So that was a surprise to me. I was like, that just seemed wrong, but of course at the time it was a totally different thing.
Yeah.
But so there were slaves there, and there was a precedent where a couple of female slaves had sued for their freedom prior to Harriet Robinson, and much far before they even thought about doing that. And in fact, the Dred Scott case is way after my story ends. That doesn't happen until 1847, so it's way after my story ends. I do include a note in the history notes so people know what happened afterwards, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happens after my story ends. It really isn't part of my story of these women.
So a good sequel. I mean,
yeah, I know, really. I've had that already.
Okay.
So Zachary Taylor and his wife, and they appear as like ancillary characters, but I don't go into too much of the politics or anything like that, other than to mention that he does have a slave.
Okay.
Yeah, so his sort of least dramatic of all presidential deaths is not addressed.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to like just briefly touch on what that was.
Sure.
That he had like spoiled milk and cherries and got sick and died from that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Not a great story.
No.
It's a great story, but not
No, absolutely not. Well, on a side note, I would love to talk a little bit about this with you, because I know it's a really big deal, and I know most of us know you as the administrator of the Paper Lantern Writers, and we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the group and also the website.
Okay, paperlanternwriters.com is where you can find us, or you can find us on Facebook in the Shine with Paper Lantern Writers group. We are a group of historical fiction authors who banded together to help each other market their books, because marketing is hard. Yeah. And as a team, we can get a lot more done. And we write blogs twice a week. We speak at conferences. We have Instagram, Facebook, all of that. Plus, we have a lot of good friends. It's really helpful to have the camaraderie that we have in the group to, celebrate all the good stuff and help us through all the stuff that doesn't go so well.
So yeah, it was just like all of y'all banded together and decided to do this.
Well, in 2019, right before the pandemic, I went to a Historical Novel Society conference in Maryland and attended a session about marketing collectives. And I said, that sounds wonderful. We have to do that. So I turned to my friend Anna, who happened to be at the same conference, and said, we have to do this. So at the next Northern California Historical Society meeting, I said, we're going to do this. Come over to my house on this day and time if you're interested, but make sure you commit, because I don't want people who are casually interested. I want people who are going to commit and really work hard to make this happen. Right. And so 5 of us did that, committed, and said, all right, we'll do it. We'll make the website. We'll figure out a name. We'll, start writing blogs and, start talking about it on our paper, on our own social media and stuff like that. And so we did that. And then a year later, we added a couple more, and now we have 15 members.
Yeah. So how did y'all come up with the name?
Oh, we had a long list of names. Some were hysterical, some were, of course, we never would use, but we wanted something that was like lighting history, or illuminating history or something like that. But we figured the paper lantern. The only problem we ran into was all of the paper lanterns, almost all the paper lanterns we could find for our logo looked like Chinese lanterns. And we didn't want Asian New Year. That was not what we wanted. So we found our nice round lantern that we use, and that works out fine.
That's great. Isn't it wonderful? I think that's one of the things that I love about this historical fiction community, is that it's so supportive, incredibly supportive. You've been incredibly supportive, like with posts that I've sent you, and I appreciate it so very much.
You're welcome.
It's wonderful to have this, and I think what you're doing and the collective and everything is very, very commendable.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Michael?
Is there an application process? Because that sounds like a great.
Every October we do. We have an open house. People are where we go through everything that we need, everything that we need from a member, and that you can kind of think about what you can achieve, what you can add to it, and what you can do to help the group as far as what we can do to help you. And then we have an application and interview process. Okay. So start watching in October for news about our open house, which starts our process.
That's wonderful. And tell our listeners one more time that website.
paperlanternwriters.com.
Okay. Well, so I know we were talking about earlier about your new book coming out next week. So can you tell us about any events or launch events that you have for the book?
On the 27th, I have a local launch event in San Jose, California. So if you're in the Bay Area, everybody's welcome from noon to 3:00 at the Village Grill, which is a local restaurant in Evergreen area of San Jose. Then in August 26th, I have a signing at Canvasback Books in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Beyond that, I have all sorts of things happening, but nothing firmed up yet.
Okay. Oh, well, that sounds great. Well, we'll be posting this actually on the day of your launch, this interview. So we'll be sure and have that posted on our website and all of the links to for people to be able to purchase your book that day.
Great.
And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you being here today, Linda.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited for you and your books, and we wish you much success on this book. And as always, for more information on Linda's books, you can click the link in the description or go to her website at I'm going to spell it out, ulleseit.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, as next week's episode features author Catherine Douglas. We also have a new historical movie review posting this week for Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, and a new historical content episode coming up on the 26th about the Berlin Airlift. Thank you to our listeners and to our viewers. This is Dee Marley and
Michael Zucker.
Keep making history and keep listening.